Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us again for today's Micro-Credential Symposium. We're getting towards the end of the day here. 2 more sessions to go. This is our penultimate session, panel 4. The topic in this particular panel is an exploration of how Australian universities are embedding micro-credentials as part of their BAU strategy. Without further ado, I'd like to pass you to Adam Brimo, who's going to be our chair for this particular session. Take it away, Adam.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate it. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I guess good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're located. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us for the last panel discussion today. I think it's been a really exciting day so far. I've certainly enjoyed all of the discussions, and I hope you have as well. So my name is Adam Brimo. I'm the founder and CEO of OpenLearning. But today I have the honor of guiding this afternoon's discussion around, or I guess with, 3 leaders in the higher education sector. So I'm really excited today to be joined by Simon Bedford, who's the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Learning Futures at Western Sydney University, Professor Martin Grimmer, the Senior Academic Lead in the Office of the Provost at the University of Tasmania, and Dr. Katrina Strampel, the Acting Director of the Centre of Learning and Teaching at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. So I think we've got a wonderful selection of experiences here. You know, a group of people who have worked in the sector for a very long time. I think are actually leading in some areas in the micro-credential and short course space as well. So in today's discussion, we'd really like to delve into some of the challenges, opportunities, and lessons learned at universities as they embed micro-credentials as part of their strategy. You know, we certainly know that many universities around Australia and around the world are working out what micro-credentials mean for them, where they fit in, and as Professor Beverly Oliver said this morning, whether people are just surviving or they're going to be thriving with micro-credentials from an education provider's perspective. So to set the scene to start off today, I was thinking we could actually get started by going around and sharing in a fairly succinct way how each of our universities is actually developing the micro-credential and short course strategy and how they're testing and validating that approach. Because I think it's, it's sometimes challenging to keep track of where every university is up to. So it'd be great to hear from all of you as to where your institutions are up to at the moment. So Simon, if you don't mind, it'd be great to start off with you.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest challenges, and has probably come up in the conference already, is the terminology around an awful lot of this. So at Western, I think we tend to avoid the term micro-credential quite a lot, and instead we use the term alternative credentials, because really a micro-credential is a subset of that. I guess the reason being that we kind of envisage alternative credentials quite broadly to include everything which is kind of sub-curricular, right the way through to undergraduate certificate and above. So I guess alternative credentials for us need to straddle AQF and non-AQF kind of lines. And it depends really what that relationship is to core curricula. But also, and this is partly because I'm the chair of the Alternative Credentials Working Party, as a scientist, I don't quite like the terms micro or macro or nano, sorry, Beverly, because they have specific meanings. And I don't think everything in this space is smaller than a unit of studies. Like, that's why we try and avoid that. Hence, when we talk about things, we talk about curriculum elements and policy to cover this. And if someone comes up with a proposal, a certain number of curriculum elements, we talk about, well, what's alternative? What's different about it, not what's small about it. So I guess that's my opening kind of line. The terminology is really difficult. In terms of our strategy at Western, we set up our working party a while back. We set up a number of pilots to look at digitally credentialed offerings. Everything from short courses, which are relatively large, through to what we call 21C curiosity pods, which I guess are those micro-credentials. They're nominally about 15 hours of study, they're very micro. The working party laid out the kind of groundwork for our credentialing framework, and I think that's really important to have a credentialing framework to see how little bits fit in. Because again, terminology difficult, but actually knowing what we're talking about and giving some sort of structure is really important. That allowed us to look at some areas of strategic priority. We developed some policies and procedures and documentation to drive our alternative credentialing strategy. And really that all kind of kicked off in 2021. I guess what is our strategy? It's kind of to leverage our core curriculum and our partnerships. We're very strong on partnerships in everyone, our students and our employers, our communities, to really respond in an agile way and a robust way to those kind of market demands at the moment. So we're very much into unbundling and rebundling our current curricula around our interdisciplinary kind of strengths and offerings. It's always going to be about the highest quality. I'm always going to say that as the PVC. I think that's really important. It needs to be very responsive to the changing demand, and that's the difficult part, being able to do it very, very quickly. The focus gives us an opportunity to offer pathways into the university, kind of advanced standing, stackable credentials, etc., but also back into the university, kind of continuing education. But also, as you've kind of mentioned, Adam, kind of professional development, reskilling, upskilling. You know, we're at Western, we've got a huge new airport and an aerotropolis just on our doorstep. So it's very much about thinking about, you know, I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't have aeronautical engineering skills. I need some upskilling. I work in programming software for videotape recorders. I don't have a job anymore. How do I get into cybersecurity, reskilling? Or I work in schools as a teacher. I need some professional development, or looking into mental health for my pupils studying online for the first time. So I guess it's that kind of diversity of stuff that we look at. That's our strategy at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Simon. Martin, did you have any thoughts on, or is there anything you want to share on your strategy as well?
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thanks everyone for joining the session. We started at the University of Tasmania to look more deliberately at our short course approach in 2018, so we're relatively new at looking at it. What we decided is we needed to have an approach that was strategic and not just reactive. And also an approach that was relatively consistent across the university, so that if nothing else from a branding and a marketing point of view, if somebody in Tasmania or outside of Tasmania wanted to come to us to look and do a short course, they knew where to actually go. There'd be, in essence, a central warehouse site that they could look at, so there'd be a coherent approach across the university. The other thing we wanted to make sure is that we actually had a mission and a purpose for short courses that was distinctive for our university. So we developed a mission, we developed a series of core principles that would guide the short courses that we offered, and then we also developed what we call product requirements. So we had essential criteria for short courses and desirable criteria for short courses. But I'd really like to emphasize Simon's point. The terminology is very confusing. And so before we got too much further into it, because as you know, the federal government talks about short courses, when actually they're talking about courses that are short. They're not short courses in terms of what we mean. And then people talk about short courses, shorter courses, and very short courses. And so there's a whole lot of confusion. So what we had to do before we went too much further into micro-credentials is define what we mean when we talk about short courses. And so that was part of our decision, is we decided, okay, what do we mean by a short course? So we developed our definition. We then also decided that there obviously are different types of short course. So we developed 2 organizing principles around it. So we said, first of all, does the short course have a micro-credential attached? And secondly, is it AQF aligned? And this gives us 3 sorts of short courses. So the first one is basically a non-credentialed course that you get a certificate of attendance for. The second is a credential course. So you get a certificate of completion, which implies that you've got some sort of assessment. And then the third type is where you've got a credential and you've got AQF alignment at the same time. And all of that then led right through to our whole framework, because it then suggested different quality assurance processes required for each type of course, et cetera, et cetera. We also then had to try and bring short courses within the whole university learning and teaching governance framework. And as you know, learning and teaching at most universities operates at glacial speed. So we can't have that with short courses because they're meant to be agile. So we developed a much more responsive, agile, push forward style of approval process that has, in essence, oversight from a central working group that we have at the University of Short Courses, but then ultimately approval of the short course at a college or faculty level, depending on what you call them at your uni. That meant that, in essence, we could probably from way to go in approval, we could probably get it done within a couple of weeks if need be, and then the course can be built from there. So really, quickly in summary, the terminology was an issue. The working within the existing university quality assurance process was an issue, and ultimately agility and being able to actually respond to industry need is something that we really have to consider how to do.
Thanks, Martin. And Katrina, it'd be great to learn a bit more about what's happening at Edith Cowan.
Sure, thanks, Adam. Not much different, actually. We have the same concerns and the same challenges. We've also been exploring this for a good 18 months, I'd say, to 2 years, and have developed a working party to try to help us understand what infrastructure is needed, what the governance will look like, policy structure should look like, that kind of thing. And what are we really defining, I suppose, is our biggest issue. So we've long been active in short courses, executive ed, continuing professional development, especially in our disciplines like business and law, nursing, teacher education. But we are having more and more to think about, we really do want to offer bite-sized credentials for student learning, and how does that differentiate from the short courses? And so we've sort of landed on definitions ourselves, which again are different from everyone in the sector and are problematic, of course, with the government as well. But looking at non-credit bearing micro-credentials as the continuing professional development, the short courses that don't lead into an AQF course. Then we have on the opposite side, we have credit-bearing credentials that are actually designed to be stackable into a course. And somewhere in the middle, we have the conversion credentials, where you might do a short course that initially isn't credit-bearing, but if you do some additional learning and some assessment, then that will convert potentially into a pathway credential. So we're also looking at staying flexible and agile and thinking about industry needs and being able to respond to those. That is how we develop our current short courses. Continuing professional development is really in collaboration with industry. And so we want to continue to be able to be agile and flexible with this. So we've actually have delegations sitting with our executive deans, and our executive deans lead our 8 schools, but ensuring that the governance is still robust and that we have appropriate standards in place. So we have a series of governance structures towards that, but much, much quicker than what our current governance is allows us to do. And I also want to note that in our strategy, we're really looking at a couple of different things that many universities, I think, are not. So one of the things is that we're not putting a set credit point value or volume of learning value to each credit-bearing micro-credential. We're really looking at designing fit-for-purpose micro-credentials. So some of those might be 10 hours in length. For us, that would be 1 credit point. Some of them might be 100. It really really is flexible. And at this point, we're exploring almost exclusively for credit-bearing micro-credentials. We're exploring for the postgraduate space, not the undergraduate space. However, we are looking at employability micro-credentials, et cetera, for the undergraduate space, but not necessarily credit-bearing.
Excellent. So I guess interestingly, I think there's some overlap in what each university is working on. I'm just wondering, has interoperability between universities come in as part of the strategy discussion, or are you looking at the micro-credentials more as a way of enforcing or sort of strengthening the existing pipeline of students or the pipeline out to industry?
I can say a few words, but a bit of both, I guess, Adam. Everyone wants new load and bring new load into the university in the current climate. We're quite lucky in the sense, again, we go back to where we are with the Aerotropolis. We have a multi-university being built there, and say 3 other universities and ourselves. So we are collaborating quite closely together to build curricula and alternative credentials at the moment. But I suspect a lot of other universities have done similar. I know in Southern Australia they've collaborated quite a lot, because they had, I think, a marine engineering project build ships and submarines, so they all collaborate together. I think that's the new way of dealing with them. Universities are not always doing it themselves. I think micro-credentialing is bringing those partners together. So when we talk about partners, it's not just industry, students, community, it's also other universities.
If I can follow, it's a really good question, because I mean, I suppose for us being in Tasmania, we are the only university here, and so partnerships, I suppose for us, it's more with our clients, I'd say, because in essence, we, as part of our university's strategy, we're looking to identify what our competitive advantage is. And so we're trying to frame our short courses in a similar sort of way. Why would you do a short course in Tasmania if you can do it elsewhere? So the Tasmanian sort of orientation is for us to be place-based, but globally relevant. So what is it about the short courses that match our university strategy, but also people can learn from who are not just in Tasmania. So we choose partnerships very carefully in that sense, that we want to make sure that we differentiate ourselves in everything we do, including in partnerships.
Great.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that. I think most universities in Australia are really still young. Certainly we are young in this space. And I think starting out with what we are doing with short courses and executive education is a really great place to start, and those collaborations with industry and other current partners in higher education. But I think as this grows, we really all need to take into account, what does transferability look like? Is it, bringing somebody into our course that they can then leave with a few micro-credentials, but go to a different university and have that mean something? So that's certainly what we need to be looking at in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I can see there's a mention of that in the discussion as well, in the comments around institutional, national, and also international stackability of qualifications. So I feel like in some ways we're just trying to tackle cross-institution at the moment, and then move from there. So
very, very complicated, I think, Adam. I really think this is a good thing, and you kind of want a bit of guidance and texture on some of that. We haven't had a huge amount of that in terms of credit and stackability. And I think, as you say, we have a curiosity pod. I think they were 2 credits, and in our system we can stack those up. But the whole point about this is, hybrid, flexible curriculum. If they want to take it from, Continuums or Martin Institute, how do you stack all those 2 credits up to build your own degree? I don't know, but that's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. So Katrina, I might go back to you. So I understand from your profile that you've recently worked on a number of whole institution approaches to designing high quality curriculum, I guess across programs, subjects, and through professional learning. So I guess this is an area that I think is quite interesting, because when we look at the strategy at an institution for micro-credentials, I think there's a number of significant changes that have to occur across the institution, both types of course and the governance, but also scaling up the learning design and ensuring that there's a high standard of curriculum that's being developed. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and sort of how you're looking at that, how you're looking at maintaining a consistent level of quality as the institution maybe moves online generally, or maybe pertaining to micro-credentials if you're there yet.
Yeah, it's still something in consideration, and I think it also aligns with the finance model. Micro-credentials and short courses are financed differently than our regular units and courses. So it's an interesting space, something that we haven't solved yet, but at the same time as we're working through our strategy, we're actually in the center developing a fully micro-credentialed graduate certificate in higher education practice. And it's a really interesting space because we're coming up across all of the challenges that I think our academic staff will face when they're doing the same, and trying to work through volume of learning and assessment and over-assessment and under-assessment and assessment at a course level when you're trying to do micro-credentials is really quite challenging, to be honest. And it's a great space. I actually have learning designers right now working with me on this graduate certificate, and understanding where we've always been so locked into, you have a certain number of credit points, and you have a certain number of learning outcomes and a certain number of assessments, all guided by policy. And now we're saying, throw that out the window. This is fit for purpose. Start with the learning outcome, and we really need to know to meet that learning outcome. And also thinking through, we can't just, as you say, we can't let that quality slide. We need to be thinking through, if this is at an AQF level 9, then we need to ensure that what we're asking in those learning outcomes are at AQF level 9 and the assessment at AQF level 9. So I wouldn't say that we have have any answers. We had floated the idea of potentially not having learning outcomes, but they're right back in there. They are a necessity. But really looking at it as a whole, for us, a whole approach to assessment. We assess at the whole of course level so that we have meaningful assessment. But what do you do then if you only have a few micro-credentials coming into that? And in terms of volume of learning, how do we look at prior learning as well as new learning with our assessment, which I think is really important and alluded to in the AQF review, but hasn't necessarily been unpacked yet.
Well, if I can add there, Adam, I think that how we deal with credit is one of the big difficulties that we've found, in the sense that we may have someone from one of our colleges putting up a short course, and in our language, it's about half a unit or a quarter of a unit. Now, it's all well and good to say, well, this gives you a quarter of a unit credit. What does a student do with that? If you don't have some way in which that can be combined with something else, or meaningfully used within the macro credential system, then it doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of value. And so that's one of the bigger issues is how do you handle the credit, but then also how do you handle it prospectively versus retrospectively. So if I can say, great, you do this short course and you do that short course and you do that one, we'll give you one award unit's worth of credit prospectively. That's all very good. But as Katrina says, someone comes in and says, hey guys, I've got all this experience. How can I use that in an RPL sense towards award study? But even beyond an RPL sense, a more active, almost like the sort of the Beacon credential system, where you actually be not just passively recognising prior learning, but actively going out there and saying, well, hey, we will recognise this and give you a credit towards a particular degree. That's our next challenge. How do we actually do that?
Yeah, look, I guess my view is, the credit thing is really important. It kind of gives you some of that value, but I also think the quality is paramount as well. Look, let's just pick a university, Monash University. If you were seeing a micro-credential from there, you go, oh, Monash University. What if it came from a private provider or some institution that you've never heard of before? Quality is really important. As I say, we've had a lot of interest into our curiosity and sustainability, but we've got a good background in that. We're number 3, I think, in the Times Higher Global Impact ratings in that area. So people go, oh, we never heard of Western Sydney University, but look, in those rankings, they're number 3. So there's a bit of prestige in the sustainability area. So you need 2 things. You need that value, you need quality as well for these particular micro-credentials. I think that's really important.
So maybe just following on from that, have you put in place, I guess, a distinct quality assurance process for these micro-credentials with short courses, in a different way to you have for, I guess, some of the accredited programs?
It's got to be faster. That's the bottom line. So yeah, there's a financial one, there's an academic one, but it just has to be much, much quicker because you don't have the time. And certainly my colleagues are the same, you have a committee and another committee and it goes through a long process. The time you get there, we would never, I think we put up 6 undergraduate certificates very, very quickly. You needed a much more agile governance process to do with that.
Yes, Adam, we've put in place a separate quality assurance framework and approval process for short courses, but that fits within our broader academic delegation framework at the university. So it's clearly stated who approves the different types of short course. So whether it's non-credential or credential, maybe defined, goes a slightly different route. But in essence, it's a approval process that clearly spells out what the quality assurance elements are for each type of course, and then who actually approves it. But to follow Simon's point, it's got to be agile and it's got to be quick. Otherwise, we're not talking macro credentials that operate over the course of years. We're talking about micro credentials that may have one-off life. You've got to be able to get them out there quickly.
Yeah, I think so, and that's an important point. I think we review these fairly regularly. So it might be a hot kind of micro-credential for a year or two, but then it dies off. And, you know, you have to have a quality assurance process which says it's no longer viable, cut it off. And we don't tend to do that. We're terrible at university to do that with core curriculum. You know, we just stack more and more courses up. We never get rid of courses or units. For these, we definitely need to have that QA in process.
Yeah. Katrina, did you want to add anything on that topic as well?
No, just similarly, we've put through some quality assurance frameworks for that, where we do be more flexible and agile. We have that sitting mostly with the executive team, but it does go through a series of working groups and committees to get there. We're also thinking through, and I agree with Simon, I've seen, you know, shelf life. There's a shelf life for many micro-credentials, and it's something that we're exploring at the moment. But also I think that it's really important to think about the way micro-credentials are delivered as well. So the quality assurance around the delivery. And we know that online learning is really problematic in terms of retention and in terms of quality. So that's something to keep in mind. And I know when we talk to our academic staff in our schools, one of the things that they say is, well, all of our short courses are actually face-to-face. So we're working with industry, who are saying to us, actually come to us and deliver in this hospital or deliver for this group of principals face-to-face for a day, for a set of 2 Saturdays or whatever that is. So thinking through the flexibility in terms of delivery and the quality around that is also really important.
Interesting, yeah. So, okay, so thanks for that. So I think, now, I've been thinking about, I guess, a related area with what we've just been talking about, which is that I think there's been a lot of discussion today around the role of formal qualifications and micro-credentials in sort of preparing people for the workforce and I guess the future of work, but really almost any job, but also to be critical thinkers and to be constructive members of society, so good citizens, which is, I think, a key, it's a key value of education that sometimes we forget about. So I guess as the workforce changes, I think we all hope that everyone can be upskilled and reskilled very quickly. And that's sort of, I guess, the premise of micro-credentials in some ways. But I think we also have to be mindful that sort of not all skills can be learned in a very short period of time. And I think there's an expectation here in some cases that micro-credentials, you know, may help us learn anything and everything in a very, you know, in a very complete, very short, low-cost package. But I think this will impact the types of programs that can be delivered as micro-credentials and the promises that we make to the public and to prospective learners about micro-credentials as well. So Simon, I actually wanted to throw it to you. So I was reading your bio, and I know it's sort of, you know, obviously, you know, you're an award-winning educator and you've got a lot of experience in the field, but there's something I picked up on, which is that, you know, you mentioned you have a passion for supporting students through courses of study that contain a large amount of knowledge. That has to be learned in order for those students to be successful in their discipline. So I think that's a succinct way of putting it, but I'm wondering, how do you approach this challenge when you're designing micro-credentials? Because some might be quite substantial.
Yeah, look, I think there are two. Look, the last 9 months, the transition to kind of, you know, best blended learning to fully online has taught us an awful lot. So it's destroyed the myth that online is easier to do than campus-based for a start. I also think, to pick up on Katina's point, that, you know, not all these courses are delivered online. You know, there's a hybridicity or a different mode. But generally speaking, if they are, you know, switching from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions kind of brings some advantages of synchronous and asynchronous delivery. But they are kind of really 2 big challenges, and that's that kind of creating a sense of belonging, which is really difficult, which helps, you know, retention and progression, and of course cognitive load or overload, which really impedes performance. And I think that's a really kind of important thing. So in a face-to-face environment, you know, a teacher can adopt and adapt the kind of class through. And so therefore, if you've got a particular discipline, they can think about authentic learning groups, peer relations, check understanding over here, target support to particular needs. And that's really not possible, or very much harder to do kind of in an online environment. So you lose non-verbal communication. That's even if your students are online and have their camera on. If they're doing it asynchronously, very, very much more differently. So, you know, there are ways over that. We have adapted. I think our curriculum design has got an awful lot better. I think students now have learning networks and social media to communicate with, which we never had when we were learning those initial kind of distance kind of courses. They've created their online study groups. You can bring that in. They have their smartphones. We'll go down that road. But anyway, that means they can remain kind of connected. And I think how we teach online, at Western we use high flex, or moving into high flex, where you do synchronous and asynchronous delivery. So I think you can do an awful lot more of those disciplines which are quite difficult. So you can do it. We're trying to flip our engineering type degrees, and they were traditionally very professionally accredited, very difficult to do. So it's a kind of hybrid flexible approach that you kind of need. So there's always going to be areas when you go, well, I'm not going to trust a nurse to have done a whole online course to inject me with something. You know, they're going to have to do some practical parts. So it's going to be about that kind of hybridization of the face-to-face and the online. But I think we've come an awful long way, even over the last 9 months, of how to establish learning in multi-mode delivery. Hopefully that answers your question, Adam.
Yeah, it does. Martin or Katrina, did you have any thoughts on it as well?
I'd probably say it's the original question. It does depend on the purpose of the short course, and I suppose the level at which it's geared. So this is again the problem with short courses, is that they mean a whole range of things, from very introductory all the way up to very high level executive development or professional development offerings. So, and they also, I mean, for us, we across our colleges, we contend with short courses that are designed to make money, short courses that are designed as a pathway, and short courses that are designed to increase educational attainment in Tasmania. So, depending on what the purpose of the course is, the nature of the skill level and the volume of learning and the complexity of the delivery is going to vary enormously. So, if I'm saying, I'm doing a short course because it's important for our mission in Tasmania as a university to get more people involved in education, versus I'm doing it because in Tasmania we're very concerned about making sure that we upskill our health workforce. The nature of the course is going to change dramatically according to that. So it really has to depend on why we're doing the course in the first place.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'd say really, I mean, the market needs to drive it, but also thinking through, when everyone started going, oh, we need to go online, we really had to think about, well, what really needs to go online and what's going to work online? And is that, are there niche courses? We're competing against everyone else. I think it's the same with micro-credentials or credit-bearing short courses. If you're thinking about a postgraduate course, do you unbundle the whole thing and offer it all as micro-credentials? Or do you offer a couple of full units that have, the traditional types of information and knowledge that hasn't changed significantly? So everyone coming through still has to do that, but maybe somebody who studied to become a nurse, for example, 10 years ago, already has that. That's fine. They've been working on that, but some things have changed. Things are in the course now, and maybe that's what they need to learn. So that's what needs to be unbundled and offered as credit-bearing short courses, potentially. I think that really needs to be driven by what the market need is.
Yeah. So on the topic of the market, I think this is a really important point, because I think we often aren't sure exactly what the market wants or what the industry is looking for or what the students will purchase. So luckily, I guess we're joined by Martin here. And Martin, I understand one of your research areas is actually around the complexity of consumer decision-making. So at the moment, I guess, society in some ways has been conditioned to want a university degree. Now, that may always be the case, or may be the case for a long time. But how do you see that playing out with micro-credentials? Is this something universities have to overcome by marketing them? Or is the market, are people actually ready to start purchasing some of these shorter courses, however we define short course or micro-credential?
Look, it's a bit of both, to be honest. I mean, part of the skill of the marketer is convincing customers to buy stuff that you create and demonstrate to them that they desperately need it. Now, in a short course sense, one of the problems universities or any supply get into is providing a short course on what you're able to supply. And that's fine, but a supply-driven approach, as you know, isn't necessarily going to hit the mark with consumers. So we spend a lot of time at the university looking at what the demand is. And so we do a large amount of industry analysis, skill-based analysis. We do a lot of work on our student profile and understanding our student profile. We do a huge amount of market research on understanding what students actually need. We look at creating, based on ABS data and other data, down to household data sets based on, if you are in this region of Tasmania, here are the skills that are likely to be useful in the coming years. So we have spent a lot of time, not just for short courses, I hasten to add, but for the university in general, coming up with a usable data set that helps us decide what courses to offer. And from a consumer behaviour point of view, that's what you kind of have to do. I mean, that's part of what market research is about, is deciding what the consumer actually wants. However, with one caveat, that the consumer does not always know what they want. Yeah. And so in a number of cases, you have to, and that's particularly where you're looking at future skill demand, you have to be able to convince the consumer that this is what's coming up. If you just do it on the basis of what people already know, you get what they've always done. You've got to be able to then push that envelope a little bit.
But yeah, look, I agree with that. Sorry, I wasn't know if you wanted me to speak, but yeah, I think the market intelligence piece is really important. It's actually very difficult in micro-credentials to do it because there's no backstory. These haven't been around for ages. You can say, look, if you do this 3-year degree, you could become an X. It makes it really difficult, and then you have that comparison piece. So when we did our undergraduate certificate short courses, we thought, everyone was in a bit of a rush. We put them up. We didn't know if they'd actually do well. They did well, but 1 or 2 of them just took completely off. Well, market intelligence would never have told us that. We look back now and go, I wonder why they were so popular. And I guess it's just that novelty at the moment that makes it very hard. You've got no track record. You've got no data sets to look back on. So it is a bit of the Wild West.
It is. So I guess in that sense, in some ways, you're sort of putting some courses out there and seeing what happens, using obviously your best judgment as to what your expertise is, what the market may be interested in. But I guess in that case, you probably have to put out a range of different types of courses, but not take too big a step into each of them. Otherwise, I guess you'll invest a bit too much time into one area.
Yeah. I think that's why it's kind of this see what sells. I hate to be, I'm an academic, but you have to actually have your marketing hat on at the moment. And that's why it's good to have small little things, and just put them out there. They're for free. See if there's a lot of demand for them, and then start to stack them together and say, okay, that leads to this, this leads to that. It could come into, core curricula, or maybe you just want to do a fully online kind of course. So it does kind of give you that opportunity, but it is difficult at the moment because I think, as Martin said, I don't think an awful lot of the consumers all know what they actually want in the future. There's a bit of a tension going on there.
Yeah. So, okay. So before we take a few more questions, I just wanted to get a sense from each of you what 2021 holds for the universities in terms of micro-credentials, and whether you see these trends impacting the style of education delivery at the university more broadly over the next 5 years, or is the strategy solely focused on micro-credentials in isolation as a separate product line for the universities themselves? So Katrina, if you'd like, you're welcome to start.
Sure. So in 2021, we will have all of our policies updated and ready to go. And we will really fully begin exploring. We already have our short course platform in place, and we're looking to leverage all of our current infrastructure for the moment for credit-bearing micro-credentials because we don't know what the demand is. But we're really looking towards the future. In 2025 at ECU, we'll actually be opening a city campus in Perth. It's the only city campus in Perth. And with that, the philosophy is that we'll be really integrated and connected with both business and community. And I think that that defines where we'll be going with micro-credentials. We'll be really looking at how we can work with industry, how we can work with community, how we will be right in that space and what we can offer them. So I think it's exciting times. We are beginning with it, and 2021 is where we're going to hit the ground running with it. But by 2025, I think we'll be really fully transformed in the space.
Great. Martin or Simon?
Okay. Yeah, I guess 2021 is big for us. You know, my working party will roll into a proper steering committee, and I'll have to oversee the approval and delivery of all alternative credentials. There'll be an institutional-wide process for kind of bringing new offerings up and looking at them and evaluating them before they're created. There'll be a marketplace for students and non-students to register for these, so internally and externally. Of course, we have OpenLearning as our platform and our credentialing engine in place. And looking forward in 2025, we have our big new course approval curriculum design policy, which hopefully will come out in 2021. So we see most of our curriculum is going to be co-created with our 21C principles. So that's very much at the heart of partnership pedagogy. So everything will be co-designed, co-delivered, co-assessed and co-credentials with our ever increasing diverse set of partners from multi-university partners onwards. So I think that relationship between kind of mainstream and alternative curriculum will be much more blurry. That there'll be more of a continuum and less of an event horizon between the two.
Look, I think for us, we have our short course and credential framework approved this year. We have a governance framework approved, an approval process and so forth. For us, I think the challenge for 2021 is embedding short courses more deeply within the strategies of each of our academic colleges, I think. So we have all the frameworks in place. We I think, need to get short courses more visible throughout the university. I think is probably one of the challenges. And the other, I think, is moving more into that, what I said earlier, that retrospective credit. How do we develop a credential process for people who come to us and who want to be able to put a portfolio in essence?
Great, something to look forward to. So we have just another question that's come in from Gavin Smith, saying or asking, do we need to cultivate a micro-credentialing mindset among our academics to encourage them to see opportunities in their discipline or professional sectors? I think it's actually quite an interesting question, because I think many of the academics are actually very well connected within their industry, but they may not realize the opportunities that could present.
I think yes, that we probably do, but I think too we have to take into consideration of the fact that certainly this year's been a bit busy for other reasons, and I think perhaps it's not been the top of our guys' agenda necessarily for obvious reasons. But I think yes, I think generally speaking, though, that's correct. I don't think that's certainly within the gaze of a lot of academics about how micro-credentials can actually be used very productively for a range of different sorts of learning activities in a university. So, I'd certainly like to see more of that.
Yeah, I'll answer Gavin's question because he's on my team. He knows what the answer to this is. You know, a small number of academics, well, actually, a growing number of academics are well into this space and see those opportunities, but I don't think that's permeated outwards. And as Martin says, you know, this year has been pretty challenging, to say the least. And they've been very much focused on other things, and of course, getting back into research as well. I'd point out very much so. So yeah, I think there's still a communication. We've talked about the problems with terminology and stuff. It will get clearer, I think, next year, but it is a bit of a challenge to kind of get that comms out to everybody.
I think too, many of the disciplines who have been doing short courses for a long time are already there. We have academics who are already there and pushing, they're the drivers for us to keep going with this. But also some of the other disciplines, I think, are waiting to see what happens. So once they have some examples, I think that they're going to be right on board with this.
Adam, we'll need to wrap up, mate, so we can get into the other session. Any final comment from yourself before we wrap?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you very much to our wonderful panel, Katrina, Simon, and Martin. It's been wonderful to chat with you today. I think I've learned a lot from you about what's happening across the universities, and I certainly hope that we're able to embed some of these learnings, I guess, in each of our organizations, and that we can do our best to support you in moving in this direction as well. So I think I'll look forward to more institution, national, and maybe even international collaboration around some of these micro-credentialing programs. But thank you once again. I really appreciate your time joining us today.
And thank you, Adam, for chairing the panel as well and keeping it flowing. All right, thanks, guys. The last session is just about to start over in the main stage. We invite everyone over to the main stage for just the wrap up and to talk about how to get access to recordings and things like that. Thank you, guys, once again. Look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.